Hello, everyone. Today we are here with Ania Baniek. Did I pronounce it well?
Pretty close.
Okay.
Vanacek.
Okay. You have to tell me how to pronounce it.
Vanacek. It's tough. Nobody gets it right.
Oh, Banachek.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, no,
If
that
it's
makes
written in
sense.
Czech, there's like an accent that tells you, but
Hmm,
in English, we don't,
got it.
mark
So
that.
your C is like the Turkish C.
Yes, that's right.
Ah, okay. Got it. Got it. Cool, cool. Okay. Ania Vanecek, who wrote a paper called Medical Countermeasure Manufacturing Zones in the Journal of Special Jurisdictions. And we are going to talk today with Ania about it. How are you, Ania?
I'm doing great. Thanks for asking.
Cool. So I must confess that I hadn't read it in a while. It was like 2 years ago, 1 year ago. And my reaction when I re-skimmed your paper today was, this makes sense. Yeah,
Yeah.
this makes total sense. So why don't we start from the beginning? What prompted you to write this paper?
Yeah. Well, me and my co-author were public health and trade professionals, respectively. And we were very bored during the pandemic. And I think just spent a lot of time thinking like, gosh, like this PPE situation, like there has to be a better way to do it. I think at that point we'd started like chartering private jets to fly things over from China, and it just like this can't possibly be the
Wow.
best solution to this. Um, and so we started talking, and I think it just kind of spiraled from there.
Wow. Yeah, I remember back then there were shortages of supply and there was a time where they were saying to average humans, don't wear masks, leave the masks for
Right.
doctors. So
Yeah, we found out later, right? It was kind of like, oh, maybe we always should have been wearing masks, but we didn't have enough. Yeah, that's
yes.
not the ideal situation. And as we started to dig into the research, like there was more, and this was documented right throughout. We all read about this in the paper, but we'd known for a while through the CDC and the FDA, like we did not have the capacity we needed and the stockpiles we needed to prepare for something like this. So
Yeah.
the question kind of arose, like, all right, well, if the system we were using before wasn't working, what can we do to prepare for the next thing? Because there will be a next one.
There will be an next one, yeah, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So is that why you thought that this could be, or why did you think that this was better done? No, no. First of all, what are medical countermeasure manufacturing zones? And then
Oh,
why did you think they would be better implemented at a zone level instead of nationally or different type of governance structure?
yeah, those are two really good questions. So a medical countermeasures manufacturing zone, or an MCMZ, it's a little hard to say, is essentially a special economic zone. So it's like a geolocated thing that has certain rules that apply only to it and not to anything outside of it. And those rules would be carefully crafted to encourage like the production of medical countermeasures in the United States. It could also work for other countries potentially, but we only looked at the US context. Um, and the goal of that would be to reshore production, one, right? So that, I mean, among other things, you just don't have to have the wait time from foreign country or the competition issues that we were facing, right? Like everyone needs masks. How do we make sure we get them? Um, but then, but then secondly, it creates something called an industrial commons. And you can have a commons of any industry, right? It doesn't have to be manufacturing. We had like an automobile industrial commons in Detroit. We had, like Silicon Valley is an obvious example for technology. And that allows not just for sort of like these incentives that the government provides, but also for sharing of ideas, right? There are coffee shops
Yes.
in these zones, right? There are,
Yeah.
lines to the grocery store where you can, run into somebody and start innovating. There are opportunities for a worker in this place to realize they have a better opportunity at that place and just to move very quickly and kind of like spitball, or spitball is not the right word, but spin up um, just more innovation than you might have when things are disparate and you're just not getting that sort of synergy. And that was generally our ideas. When you put everything in one location and really incentivize growth and innovation, you get not only like more masks in the stockpile, but also
Yeah.
potentially better masks.
Yeah. And other different types of products that would emerge from that agglomeration of different industries, companies, well, same industry, different companies, different stages
Exactly.
of
Yeah,
companies
right.
too.
There's not just the final product, but all the components that go into it as well. Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I can definitely see how that can, and this was one of your points in the paper, this can initiate a whole new cluster industry in the US, specifically around medical products, no? And I've seen this working very well in places like in the Netherlands,
Mhm.
ports, big infrastructure projects with stakeholders that have been there for a long time. Many
Yeah.
ports are now opening their doors to innovation clusters for startups because they see that if they attract these more younger people and companies, then they can create these synergies, these catalysis, and then they create a hub of
Yeah.
innovation around the port industry there. And this has worked really, really well in ports in the Netherlands. And I can definitely see how, well, here we wouldn't start with a I guess the version of the port would be like the government putting these incentives or the zone authority or the entity in charge of the zone, right? But I can
Mhm.
definitely see how this can lead to advancement and improvement and technological independence
Yeah.
in the medical industry. And that was another one of your points, no? The technological, not to rely so much on global supply chains.
Right. Well, yeah, I mean, global supply chains, I'm not, that was not my expertise area, but it's, everything's fine until the supply chain isn't fine anymore. And then
Yeah.
in a case like, a pandemic or just medicine in general, like people are literally dying. It's not just, we don't have tin cans full of beans, which is also a big issue, but um,
So in your paper, you touched the point on how the US health industry is very dependent on foreign imports. And I want to know how your proposal tried to tackle that dependency.
yeah, I mean, I think at the most basic level, it's if we had our own manufacturing capacity, we wouldn't be dependent, right? Um, I think that's really the core. On a maybe a slightly deeper level, we as a country really stepped away from manufacturing a while ago, and there were losses beyond just like the existence of products that generated, right? Like those factory jobs were pretty good jobs back in the day. I'm in Milwaukee, and the history of Milwaukee is like there are some very like direct points on the timeline that line up with when the factory jobs left, and what that did to wealth and the strength of communities. Kind of going back to this idea that if there's jobs in an area, then there's people working those jobs, there's people servicing the people working those jobs, and
Yeah.
it can create a really nice place to live. And so, yeah, when we became dependent on other countries for our products, in cases like global shortages of masks, that had a direct impact on lives. But I think a little bit deeper than that, there are reasons to think about just the value of making things and what that does for the people living here.
Yeah. And this idea, it sounds a bit not contradictory, but goes against trends of outsourcing everything to China, for example, or now to Thailand or Malaysia or Vietnam or Mexico, other places where uh, products are being made, products that are sold in the US. But I think you have really good arguments, especially from if you put all this innovation in a cluster for why creating manufacturing hubs within the US, which is a country like you said, stepped away a long time ago from manufacturing and focused more on 4.0 and things like that.
Mhm.
Can you touch on some of those reasons for why going back or taking, why going back to manufacturing itself instead of focusing on ideas and software production as opposed to hardware?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I don't want to suggest that there isn't a role for manufacturers in India or Indonesia or China or any of the other
Yeah.
countries that you mentioned. Like, in no way would this be trying to like cut America out from the global supply chain. Like, there's definitely still trade that happens between, and I think in the paper we even discuss the way that pairing this with foreign trade zones, so like a duty-free store is a foreign trade zone in an airport, would facilitate trade, right? So if you, I don't know, if the elastic that you needed for something was made abroad, it could be cheaper to purchase and then subsequently to export whatever your final good is back to that country or anywhere else. So like there's definitely a role for trade and sharing on a global scale here. But I think it's an interesting question, right? Because it's not that it can't exist in any other industry, right? You can have very good workplaces and very good strong sort of economies. The thing that's cool about manufacturing, again, is that so then I think there's a value to just investing in general in technical jobs in the United States. These tend to be, I mean, it's skilled labor, but it's not like college educated labor. And we've focused so far in on that like very specific pipeline. And I say that as somebody, pursuing my second master's degree. I love it, but I also wish I didn't need school. Like, it's not. It's a very specific path, and it's like really agonizing in some pretty awful ways. And it's just, there shouldn't only be one way to make a living in the United States. And like I said, like in Wisconsin, we used to have and we still do to a certain extent, but a much stronger tradition of manufacturing jobs. And I had an aunt and an uncle that used to work at a plant down in Kenosha, which is just outside of Chicago now. And they had, pensions. They put both their kids through college. That should still be possible. And the reason it's not possible is because we just got rid of it. And that's, it's not necessarily in the best interest of like a diverse community to make everyone perform the same job functions.
Yeah, I understand completely what you mean. And it's funny that you say that there's just one path in the US because I'm from Colombia, right?
Mm.
And when I compare people's opportunities or ways of seeing their possible future in Colombia with the US, here I'm in the US, by the way, I'm in South Carolina. You can you can say, you know what? I'm just gonna work as a cashier, or I'm gonna do DoorDash or
Yeah.
Postmates or whatever, and or be a pet sitter or something, and you're kind of okay. Like there's a limit, but they're kind of okay. But in Colombia, you cannot say you know what, I want to be a football player, or I simply wanna do construction or any other technical job, because you're not that the wages just completely different. And
Yeah.
I talked about this topic with my husband, who is from here, and he has a very similar perspective as you. And he said, you know what, the fact that the US has pushed so much people to follow the university career path has led to a bunch of young people with huge amounts of debt, student debt, to the government. And then that's like a difference that I see between two countries, because in Colombia then people don't have those big debts, so it's just different. That's like a side topic. But do you think somehow that, and I know this is not connected to your paper,
I love
but
talking about this stuff.
what do you think of what my husband says about how the government just pushes everybody to follow that path,
Mhm.
and then that's more income for it.
I can't pretend I've given that specific idea that much thought, but I think you can see it, right? And I think it came from a good place, right? Like,
Yeah,
you
absolutely.
know, there's like even back, when I was a kid, and that wasn't it's longer every year ago, but like relative to when we started doing this not that long ago. Um, the idea was really, if you go to college, you go to college because A, you love to learn, which is increasingly less the case, or B,
Yeah.
because it will, like, at a certain point you're going to hit an income cap and it's going to get you beyond that income cap. So, do it. Work hard in high school, get into a good college, work hard in college, get a better job. And yeah, we have too many college educated people now for, like the number of roles that really require that level of I don't know, like English classes, right? And so we're not getting those returns back. And it's very frustrating. And I think we've seen, right, just with the discussion around college debt and debt forgiveness, that people are frustrated by that. I think, but beyond just like how much it costs to go to college, because even if it was free, I think the thing that frustrates me is this idea that somehow like sitting behind a desk and working with like abstract thought is somehow better than actually making something with your hands.
I completely agree with you. I completely, and I am saying it from a place of I have PhD, but I
Yeah.
couldn't agree more with you. What you learn doing versus what you learn studying. Well, actually, more like this. But you see, there's not just the only path to.
Yeah.
In this
Well,
helps,
it's
but
funny. So I love, this is also anecdotal, but I love restaurants. Like I love being in restaurants. I love food. I love like the design of them. Now that I'm studying architecture, I'm really
oh,
annoyed
nice.
in spaces, um, but I always find myself going back and working with them. And what's interesting is that sometimes I really feel like most of the skills that I ever bring to another job, I learned like by working on my feet, dealing with people that I had like no understanding of until the moment I started interacting with them. Right. And then, and I say this with love for chefs, but like mediating between like customer needs and like people who are quite literally trapped in a 105-degree space. Like
Yeah.
they are not, it's not a lovely place to have an emotion, a kitchen. So, there's real value to, just like being in service or production or, um, just something that's not what I think is commonly sort of like told, which is, study and then study more and then get an unpaid internship, and learn how to dress properly and how to like say yes to your superiors. And you never think on your feet. You never solve like a really like imminent problem. I just think that's a shame. There's real skills there that do become handy later if you know to utilize them.
Oh, yes. One of the best operators of companies that I know, she started in call centers. So in call
Mhm.
centers, many years in call center, and she worked, you have to be on call all the time. You have to really be calm because people insult you. Some people actually ask you to marry them, but the majority of people call because they are upset with something. And
Yeah.
then that really teaches you a lot about organizational skills and reporting and things like that. So I definitely agree with you. And I think that, or what do you think about creating these hubs where we combine the manufacturing with perhaps apprentice apprenticeship programs for technical short-term courses, right? That would be really
Yeah.
conducive to something where you have like the location that needs the skills with the facility with the possibility for you to get trained and
Mhm.
I don't know, a partnership with a technical college of some sort. I think that can not only help the individual people that are doing that, but also creating that agglomeration effect that you want. The snowballing was, I think, the word that you were looking for of
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
medical manufacturing industry, no?
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, the question arose in the paper of like how you end up choosing like which state or which city gets these zones. And one of the criteria for consideration was like a partnership with a university. And I think that's the exact idea. And it's, again, it's not necessarily with the idea that you would then get a college degree and go off and do something completely different, but I think ideally with education, right, you like are assigned a paper and it's about something completely different, right? Like it's about, I don't know, like Russian literature. And you go back to whatever project you're working on and you say, there was this story in folklore way over there that gave me this idea about how we could do this a little bit better. And that's what innovation is. And so it's like the more we can think about these things as like creative fields, yeah, I absolutely agree. I think that that could be a really cool opportunity to just have better ideas
I
in
agree.
general, regardless of who's having them. Yeah.
Yeah. So how are you bringing your medical background to architecture?
Mm. Well, I'm not yet. Um, but I think there's a lot of focus in both public health and architecture, right? About how the built environment affects the quality of life that we're able to live. And in both, there's an idea, we use different language in both fields, but the general idea of what a healthy environment is. And it's, you need clean air, you need clean water, you need sunlight, right? We're kind of just all like sentient plants. Um, but you also need things like community, right? Under the Obama administration, the um, Surgeon General like kind of made it his mission to go around and talk about the loneliness epidemic, which leads to things like drug overdoses, right, and suicides,
Suicides.
but also just like chronic illness as well can develop. And so my goal coming to architecture school from a background in health policy was really just to understand that better. There are projects all over the country working on things like sensory gardens are a really cool idea, and they're essentially gardens that are specifically designed with plants that are touchable or have really
Oh,
like
nice.
like
Oh,
beautiful or like memory triggering scents like lavender, right?
oh, yeah.
Kinetic sculptures, fountains that create these noises, or grass that rustles in the wind, um, which can be very calming and also like enriching spaces for people with like sensory issues. So either hypersensitivity, like if you're on the spectrum, or sort of starting to lose sensitivity, like if you are dealing with dementia or Alzheimer's. And these
Yeah.
gardens are places, yeah, that just like allow like you to slow down and like engage with your environment, which that relationship has proven health effects.
Yeah, when
And
you're
so there's a lot you can do, and there's a lot we know how to do. It's just a matter of finding the time and the money and the space to do it.
only those three things.
Only
The time, the money, and the space. When you
yes.
were describing them, the idea, thinking about your two backgrounds, or your background and your present, what came to my mind was what the sensory gardens could be really nice for people at the later stages of their life, people who are already maybe in palliative, or not in palliative care, but like ending. It would be a really nice place to go
Yeah.
and feel alive
Yeah.
one of the last times.
Yeah. There is I joke a lot about, and it's a joke I think common in architecture, that sort of our generation, the upcoming generation, are just kind of trying to undo a lot of the problems that we created in the last 5 decades. And one of them I really think was sort of taking all of our old people and putting them into these really clinical
Yes.
places to just kind of go and die, which
Yes.
you might live there for 20 years. It's not that uncommon. And even if you're only there for um for 5 days, right, it doesn't have to be like that. and
It
and
doesn't.
there's reasons to have sanitary spaces, right? We obviously don't want germ spreading, but you can have a pretty sanitary space and still have fresh air coming in and
Yeah.
still have, some kind of sensory stimulation. Um, so yeah, I think, as the hope is that as the baby boomer generation ages and starts to need assisted living, whether that's like in
You're
the
not
literal
gonna put
sense of,
them there.
yeah, right, they're just not going to accept it, and we're going to have to meet that demand. It's going to be better for everyone. Yeah,
Oh, it's funny. My mom actually said, so we don't tend to put our elders. I'm from Colombia again, and
yeah,
we just they live with us. You probably know with all so many Latin people living here. Sometimes in a house you have like three generations.
hmm
So yeah, so the grandma, usually the grandma because men die earlier,
hmm
but the grandma, the
yeah.
couple, the kids. But yeah, my mom says she would like to actually be not go to an elder care place, to a hospice, but like be in a house with four friends,
Mhm.
four people, and with a nurse, something like that. That's
Yeah.
very off topic, and I forgot what we were talking
I think
about.
it all kind of fits, right? It's all about just like building a community
Oh
that
yes,
works
yes.
in more than one way, like um I grew up, my mom's side of the family is gigantic. She was one of 10. I'm one of 26 grandchildren.
Oh
Um,
wow.
yeah, and my grandmother died in her 90s after her husband, my grandfather, surrounded by her kids and some of her grandkids, and it's just like, and that's I think what most of us want. And not everyone. Some of us want to die on a motorcycle, and I respect that, but a lot of people, it's like you ask them how they want to die, they're like, I just want to be surrounded by loved ones. So why
Yeah.
have I made that hard?
Yeah, whether those loved ones are your grandkids, your kids, your cats.
The other
Yeah,
people you work with at the NCMZ?
yeah, exactly. That you took the technical training program with.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, exactly.
yeah.
Lifelong bonds.
Well, that is such an interesting thing that you are doing. Yeah, I can see your path from thinking about how spaces influence to creating those
Yeah.
spaces. Oh,
Well, and you probably know this better than I have, but just I've traveled a reasonable amount outside the US. And I think it's just realizing at a certain point, like everyone does it a little bit differently, and we don't have to do it the way that we're doing now. Like we
yeah.
haven't been doing this for very long in the first place, and it doesn't it I shouldn't say that. It takes a lot of effort and time and money and space. But it doesn't mean it's impossible, and it certainly doesn't mean it's wrong to try new things.
No, 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 no. And I really like the example you mentioned in your paper about Denmark, for
Mhm.
example,
Yeah.
and its clusters there.
Yep. Yeah, the I think that's as simple as the clusters that were close together, right? Had innovation, that industry really grew. Um, there was another example in telecommunications where they telecommuted and the industry kind of never took off, and it was because of those water cooler conversations, metaphorically, right? Just not occurring at the same level. We're zooming right now, but how often has anyone ever like zoomed into a stranger to be like, I have this idea. I think you might know about it. What do you think?
Yeah, idea chat roulette.
Yeah.
No, I guess maybe there's,
I mean, it's kind
may-
of like a Discord channel in a way.
yeah,
It's kind of like a YouTube comment section, maybe. Um,
yeah, but I don't
but
think
there's also just that digital distance that we talk about all the time, right? Like you say things on the internet that you're just not going to say in public, both for good and for poor. It's just a different way of interacting.
But one thing that I don't want to forget to ask you
Mhm.
is what type of incentives does or do you
Oh,
suggest, then we're talking about zones, journal of special jurisdiction, what incentives do you suggest for the medical zone to have?
yeah. So we proposed two ideas in the paper. The first was like tax incentives, basically. So either lower tax rates or like tax reimbursements reductions in tariffs, but financial, like through the tax code incentives to reshore and then produce products here. The other one was related, but it was like guaranteed purchases. So we have like Buy American, we have the Berry Amendment. There's tons of precedents for, basically guaranteeing that if you make something here, a certain amount of your product will get purchased, which helps companies justify the move, right? It is expensive to move back here. I think it's important to acknowledge that. And it's more expensive to produce in the United States. But if we can guarantee that, that cost is going to be offset because you're going to sell whatever you make, that risk kind of evaporates.
Yeah. So to have preferential treatment in government contracting, yeah, that would definitely make, that is a huge attraction point.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it's something that you can definitely have in zones. And I say because one, a US zone that I'm currently involved with, it's led by Native Americans. And Native Americans have preferential treatment for government contracting. And really, it's really, really core to their economic development. So yeah, I can definitely see how that can be implemented at the level of a zone. And
it kind of goes back to, when we started to give everyone loans to go to college, right? Everyone started going to college. You can do a lot. You can do a lot with a government purse.
Yeah, you can. You can. Well, Anya, I don't want to keep you, well, I do want to keep you here longer, but we've been here almost, well, more than half an hour, 40 minutes. What do you see? So my last question is going to be, what do you see do you see this idea being implemented, and what steps you think must be taken for it to go from idea to implementation?
That unfortunately is a question for my co-author.
We
I
have to
was
bring
much
him
more
then.
next episode maybe.
Perfect.
I'll come
Okay.
up. Yeah.
Well, Anya, thank you so much for talking to me here. And I'm going to put your contact details here. So anybody who wants to reach out to you, they do it.
Sounds good. It was great talking to you, Natalie.
Thank you.